You're listening to Colorado Chamber Office Hours, a podcast that explores what matters most to business. I'm your host, Ed Sealover, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for the Colorado Chamber of Commerce and editor of the Sum and Substance. Let's get talking. Welcome back, everyone. It is very likely that you, like I, have gotten your primary ballot in the mail over the past few days. And while there's a lot of considerations that will go into who will earn your vote, we here at Colorado Chamber Office Hours figure that if you're listening to our podcast, the candidates' stances on business issues will be one of the major deciding factors. And so we endeavored to bring on the two men who are competing in the Democratic primary for the governor's office, a seat that will be open after 8 years because Governor Jared Polis is term limited from running again, and to have them talk exclusively business issues for you. Because of how busy these men are, it hasn't been easy to schedule both. But just before we finish putting together this episode, I'm happy to announce that we were able to schedule an interview with one of the candidates, U.S. Senator Michael Bennet, for later this week, and we will feature that interview on next week's episode. And today, we have our conversation on business issues with the other candidate in the Democratic gubernatorial primary, Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser. Also, just a word about why we focus on the Democratic gubernatorial primary rather than the Republican gubernatorial primary. Essentially, it came down to time. We try to keep these episodes to 20 to 25 minutes, and we felt that giving any less than 10 minutes to each candidate to discuss these issues would be shorting this important conversation. While the Democrats have 2 gubernatorial candidates, the Republicans have 3, and we felt that might stretch an episode out a little too far. We will endeavor to bring onto the podcast the winner of that primary contest between Scott Bottoms, Barbara Kirkmeyer, and Victor Marks before the general election in November and discuss business issues with them. But again, I would suggest that if you want to learn where they stand on the biggest subjects for employers, please check out the story on that race also on the Sum and Substance. Now, without further ado, here is our conversation with Democratic gubernatorial candidate Phil Weiser. Stick around afterward for a little bit more talk about the primaries for statewide offices. Attorney General Phil Weiser, thank you for joining us today on Colorado Chamber Office Hours.
Ed, I'm happy to be here with you.
Great. I think if there was one question business leaders would want me to ask, it's this. Colorado is now the 3rd most expensive state in America to live. It's the 6th most regulated state in the country. And it's gone from winning about 90% of its competitions with other states for corporate expansions, relocations, to batting closer to 50-50. So would you agree that we need to reform the state's business atmosphere? And if so, what can the next governor do to do that?
I absolutely agree, and I agree because of the leaders of businesses who I have listened to on the ground. Chris Pearson, Agile Space Industries, for example, in Durango had to decide whether to build his next operation in Colorado or elsewhere. He chose Oklahoma. Just the other week, I was with someone who's in the outdoor rec industry. They're in Grand Junction. That's their headquarters. They had to decide where to expand. They chose Utah. The simple challenge, Ed, is too many businesses feel that the wind is in their face. I want them to feel the wind is in their back. The way we go about that, starting, is with listening. Asking questions to business leaders, what are your pain points? What makes it hard to expand? For Chris Pearson, permitting times were a nightmare. He said to me he had a permitting issue in Oklahoma that got resolved in days that would have taken months in Colorado. That's a call to action. It's got to start with a mindset. The mindset is we want our businesses here to thrive. When they're hitting pain points or challenges, we do something about it. This is an issue not just for bigger businesses, but small businesses. A friend of mine was opening up a bookstore, had to get the required authorizations. It took over 30 hours. That should have taken 30 minutes. We've got work to do.
Obviously, what you're talking about here is regulatory reform in some ways, also changing mindsets, which can be somewhat harder. This year, legislators already passed a bill saying, look, agencies have to go back and they have to look at their rules and review them more thoroughly and look at reforming them more often. What more can you do if elected governor?
I want to mention 2 elements of my leadership that are unique. I worked in the White House with President Obama working on cost-benefit analysis. How do we get regulatory frameworks right? You could look at, back then, the emerging technology was nanotechnology. Today, we'll probably talk about artificial intelligence. We worked on a regulatory framework document, I did as part of the White House, with those in the Office of Management and Budget to hit the right balance about how do you make sure to allow innovation while protecting consumers. And if we miss that balance, if we have overly restrictive regulations, if the benefits don't justify all the costs, we need to do something about it. I've done that work at the federal level. I want to take it to Colorado. Secondly, in Colorado, I've led on the Colorado Privacy Act. There's not a lot of controversy about this law because the way we crafted it was the right way, which means you really listen to those not just pushing the law, but those who it's going to have an impact on. One of the parts of this law I'm proud of, if you have under 100,000 customer records, you're exempted. That means small businesses don't have burdens that can be really hard for them to follow on. And when we set obligations, we created principles that have to be followed, not overly prescriptive requirements that can quickly become out of date. When I'm governor, we're going to take this requirement you mentioned to review regulations and do it the right way.
As you mentioned, artificial intelligence is something that I want to talk about. You're actually in a very unique position where you'll be crafting the regulations around artificial intelligence over the next 6 months in your current position. But once that's done, if you are elected governor, do you say, okay, we're good? Or do you think more needs to be done around AI?
My view about public policy is fundamentally an innovation mindset, which means I'm always asking, how do we do better? Continuous improvement is a core value for me. A real challenge sometimes is you adopt any type of program or any type of regulation and you say, okay, we're done now, and then you leave it on inertia. That is almost always a mistake. We should always be asking, are the obligations, are the protections in place working? Are they overbroad and creating undue burdens? One of the areas we're going to be working on with artificial intelligence is protecting kids from AI chatbots. We didn't have any regulatory protections for kids from social media, and our kids have suffered. That's why I'm suing Meta. That case goes to court in August. I want to make sure with AI chatbots that they're not harming kids, telling them how to die by suicide, for example, or telling them how to go blow up a school. We need oversight. AI is an incredibly transformative technology. Much good can and will come of it, and they're real threats too.
Okay, so this is a conversation to be
To be
continued.
continued,
Certainly.
Ed.
Yes. Along the same lines, people talk about AI and they talk about data centers that are needed to power AI. The legislature just got into this debate this year and had no answers come out of it. What is your view on data centers in terms of incentivizing versus regulating versus cutting a path somewhere in between?
I have three conditions for data centers. Number one, we need to make sure that consumers are protected and aren't going to have to pick up any of the costs of electricity. Number two, we need to make sure that our clean energy goals continue and our climate commitments continue, which means they've got to be powered by clean energy. And number three, data centers have to work for the community. The community needs to be at the table, listen to, their concerns have to be heard. We have to make sure there's viable water and more. Here's an example of where a data center could make sense. Craig, Colorado. In Craig, Colorado right now, we're shutting down a coal plant. Chris Wright can say what he wants, but he's got no authority to keep it open. When we close it, the people who are working that coal plant are going to lose their jobs. I want to make sure we have a just transition. If we can create data centers in Craig powered by geothermal, which is a promising energy source on the western slope, we can meet our just transition goals. And to your question, that's an economic development imperative to me. I am willing to provide subsidies so that we don't leave those workers without jobs.
Okay. Well, that is an issue that I'm sure is going to be coming up. Another one that's going to be coming back, as you know, Governor Polis once again vetoed a bill to eliminate the second election required in the private sector unionization process under the Colorado Labor Peace Act. But I found it interesting. The last minute appeal Bill sponsors made this year wasn't a letter to him, but to you and your primary opponent, asking you, if elected, to sign the bill unamended when it comes back next year, as everyone knows it will. So I guess my question to you is, would you sign that bill unamended?
My process, and it's important, Ed, to see this as a model of how I operate, and I mentioned it before. I'm going to bring everybody to the table, and I'm going to say to labor, I agree with you. This second election requirement that applies in all situations, even when you have, let's say, overwhelming support in the first election, needs to be changed, needs to be improved. And I'm going to say to business, what are your concerns? And I'm going to really listen, and I'm going to work the problem to come up with a solution that makes sense. I can't tell you right now what exactly it is, but I can tell you, having done this before, that leading a process with real listening, searching for solutions, can lead to the best results. Too often, sometimes in public policy conversations, people will say, I wasn't at the table. I was on the menu. I don't want any group to feel that they're shut out of critical conversations that affect them. For me, that's going to be one of the cornerstones of my leadership.
And I won't ask you to give an exact answer right now because I understand that listening does need to be done here. But in your opinion, do you think that solution ultimately will involve getting rid of a second election or changing the parameters around it?
I'm not going to start with a preconception or pre-commitments. I'm going to start with an open mind to work this problem together. When we do that, that gets our best solutions. One thing I just want to plug, because it clearly something you're thinking about. The Romer Institute was just set up, and Paul Romer, his son, a Nobel Prize-winning laureate, talked about the way Roy Romer led, and talked about how much he led by listening to bring people together to solve problems together. And it said because he listened, he could bring together labor, business, and both political parties to stay on task. And what Roy Romer would say, and it's one of my favorite teachings, all truth is partial. Listening to people on the ground with lived experience is how you get to the truth. That's how I'm going to lead.
Yeah, I'm sure this is a conversation that business may not be eager to have, but will want to have a conversation this year. One other thing I want to ask you about, Governor Polis has worked for years to reduce the state's 4.4% income tax rate. At the same time, we've got a group of organizations taking a measure to the ballot this year that would scrap that kind of flat tax rate and replace it with a graduated income tax proposal, could establish rates as high as 9.5%. First of all, how would you vote on that if that hits the ballot? And second of all, what is your prevailing belief about whether the state's income tax system works or needs reform?
I have a policy before something is locked in on the ballot. I don't take positions on it because I obviously there's so many hypotheticals there.
Fair enough.
I do have views on Tabor, and it's really important we talk about this, Ed. I believe Tabor needs to be improved, and I believe it's hurting us. Let me explain what I mean by that. For 15 or so years, we underfunded education. You know well about the BS factor, which feels like it stands for one thing, and it is BS. But it's about budget stabilization. What does it mean? It means that we hollowed out education. It means that we have student-to-teacher ratios that are unacceptable. It means our best teachers are leaving the profession because we're not paying them enough. It means we don't have enough youth mental health support. It means we don't have enough career and technical education. I encourage everyone to look at Rocky Mountain Partnership. It is a really powerful example of cradle to career thinking. I want to do what Dan Ritchie long called on us to do. Go across Colorado. He called it Building a Better Colorado. I'm thinking about a set of civic assemblies going to the people and saying, look at how Tabor's hurting us. Now, I want to be very clear. We're not changing whether people can vote on their own taxes. That's locked in. That's settled. But to your point, would we have a progressive income tax of some kind? Would we consider other taxes? I'm very open. I think there's some real strong merit there. We got to be smart about what we might do, why we might do it, and where the money goes. Because the public is often skeptical, wondering, does this make sense? And I think the way you meet that skepticism is head on, transparently in people's community to say, hey, can we do something about Tabor? And most importantly, the hard cap that currently exists on state spending, I think this is a Yiddish word, fakakta. What does it mean? It means that when you have any type of dedicated fee, for example, that supports a particular program, like the license fee that supports law enforcement education, if you want to increase that fee to support what you're doing, and it might be a bipartisan priority like law enforcement training, you can't. Because if you increase that fee, you bump up against the Tabor cap, you have to cut elsewhere. No other state has a cap like that. We shouldn't either.
Okay. I want to do a real quick follow-up to that because you mentioned the state's workforce development, career technical education system in there. Do you feel that that also needs, whether it involves the Tabor cap or not, that that also needs reform? Are there ways we can better prepare our students?
There is no question in my mind, Ed. Look at the painful reality. This is part of what I'm going to take to the voters. So many people graduate high school, they don't have a marketable skill or a path to a marketable skill. They don't have maybe even third or eighth grade reading level or math level. We need to make sure we're hitting those milestones, setting people up to get good jobs, not to say, I have no hope. And there are different statistics here. But right now, this is before AI has impacts in the workforce. Between 10 and 20% of young men, 18 to 22, are doing nothing right now. They're not in school. They don't have jobs. That is a failure that we need to meet head on with real opportunity. One of my initiatives is called Colorado Corps. It's to train people in critical areas: policing, firefighting, nursing, teaching and counseling. We have shortages all over Colorado. Let's start that in high school, set people up, whether after high school, a community college, or a college, to go into public service for a number of years working in parts of our state. It will be transformative for those communities and for the people doing it. So yes, our career and technical training system has a lot of room for improvement. Taking on that issue is high on my agenda.
Attorney General Phil Weiser, thank you so much for giving us these ideas to think about.
I look forward to the ongoing dialogue. Thanks for the opportunity, Ed.
So, what else will you be voting on this month beyond the governor's race, assuming that you choose to vote in either primary? Well, there are no less than 23 state legislative primaries that may or may not involve your home district. And if you tune into our June 29th episode, I'll dive into that subject a little bit more. But there are also 3 races for statewide offices that everyone will get to vote on this November: Attorney General, Treasurer, and Secretary of State. And while the parties have already chosen their nominees for Treasurer, that's State Senator Jeff Bridges on the Democratic side and former Senate President Kevin Grantham on the Republican side, voters have some work to do in the other 2 races. Democrats have no less than 4 candidates on the ballot to succeed Weiser, who is term limited as Attorney General. There is Jenna Griswold, who currently serves as Colorado's Secretary of State and is in fact term limited from seeking re-election there. There is Michael Doherty, who's the district attorney serving the Boulder area. There is Hetal Doshi, a former Assistant U.S. Attorney for Colorado and Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the U.S. Department of Justice. And there's David Seligman, the founder and CEO of the Towards Justice law firm that has been active in many legislative battles dealing with plaintiffs' rights and civil rights. Republicans have a primary of their own for the Attorney General position, though it involves just 2 individuals. Michael Allen is the current district attorney for El Paso and Teller counties. He faces David Wilson, who served in the U.S. Army's Judge Advocate General's Corps as both a prosecutor and defense attorney, and who has linked his candidacy closely to Scott Bottoms' gubernatorial run. Lastly, there is the Secretary of State's race. Republicans have nominated James Wiley, who is a former Libertarian Party candidate for Colorado's 3rd Congressional District, and Democrats will choose between 2 women from Jefferson County, State Senator Jessie Danielson, and Jefferson County Clerk and Recorder Amanda Gonzalez. Those are very brief overviews, but I encourage you to do your homework on where those candidates stand and to vote, whether you are a Democrat, a Republican, or unaffiliated. Ballots must be returned by June 30th, so you got a little time for study. Meanwhile, we'll be back in 2 weeks talking about the legislative primaries. Until then, stay safe and stay informed. That's all for this episode of Colorado Chamber Office Hours. Once again, I'm Ed Sealover, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for the Colorado Chamber of Commerce and editor of the Sum and Substance. I'll keep the conversation going at tsscolorado.com, and we'll see you next time as we explore the issues that matter most to business.